Hi, we will be discussing another round of PAD 742, Development Theories and Administration. And we began this class a while ago, and we have discussed an array of topics. Understanding the concept of development and what entails development is one which has generated various discussions and opinions from others. We open the knowledge and understanding of what underdevelopment is about. So the development ravages a whole lot of countries in the world as of today. In some scholarly works, they're referred to as third world countries. In others, they're referred to as underdeveloped countries. And in some others, they are known as developing countries. But however one sees it, it simply means on a comparative basis, they do not measure up to what is globally understood as development. Various perspectives and views and theories have been propounded that we have examined in the course of this discussion, ranging from the modernization school of thought to the development and dependence theories, and to other perspectives that are within the ambit of modern theories that have sought to explain development, the procedures and processes for development, and have also looked at underdevelopment and have proffered solution or giving an understanding of the step-by-step procedure to attain development. So in the course of this lecture, we have looked at those various perspectives, those views that have sought to explain what development is about and what underdevelopment is about. And we have taken a position on some of the aspects that one should follow to attain development. In the last class, we looked at the environment of development, the ecology of development, and we looked at the economic perspective, the political perspective, the socio-cultural perspective, and even the administrative perspective, and how they all influence development, or the flip side of it. Development is two sides of the same coin. Why it brings development on one hand, it tends to trigger on the development on the other. So there have been practices that we have exposed to that have either been in support of development or have been inimical to development. And in it all, it guides an understanding of the steps, the procedural patterns that should be followed for one to attain development. So having said that, in the last class, we discussed on certain aspects or steps that were taken by the developed countries to attain development. And we looked at the issues of funds. And we talked about the administrative procedures that were followed to attain development. And we looked at civil reforms that took place within the confines of the civil service, both pre-independence and post-independence, and how the civil service, being the major organ of administration of the government, can be used to tailor development and to transform the lots of the lives of the citizenry. So in today's lecture, we shall be looking at another aspect that is similar to what was discussed last week, but this time around, our emphasis will be on planning. So I will be sharing my screen with you at this point so that we would have an idea of what we will be discussing. Planning, like we all know it, from a layman's perspective, simply means a step-by-step approach in the attainment of certain goals. So for every activity, there must be a plan. Like it is said, that when you plan to succeed, you must put in measures that would trigger the right steps and that would follow the pattern that would lead to development. In the course of this study, we shall be looking at the various plans that have been put in place from pre-colonial periods to the post-colonial state in Nigeria, and how planning, the developmental plans that have been put in place have been able to pursue development in actual terms. We would also be looking at how relevant the whole idea of planning is when one talks on issues of development administration. So having said that, it is worthy of note that prior to independence, the colonial government that we had in place had some certain ideas that they pursued through consistent planning and through processes that, in their own opinion, would trigger development if followed religiously. And then post-independence, there were also measures put in place by the successive governments under various development plans within the pursuit of development. So planning within the confines of our own environment, within the ecology of our own discussion on development administration, revolves around the deliberate efforts and steps put in place by the government to attain development or to transform the lots of the society from an underdeveloped status to a more advanced and developed one. So having said that, we said that Nigeria, like many other countries, have always had development plans. They were more pronounced during the early years of independence up to the 90s. However, there are still development plans, but not as prominent in development literature as they used to be. This unit deals with the 10-year plan of development and welfare for Nigeria from 1946 to 1956, and the criticism that greeted the plan and subsequent plans that were also developed within the confines of the pursuits for development in our own environment. So it is expected of us to understand what plan is and to give the steps and reasons behind plans and why plans succeed and the pitfalls that are inherent in plans that necessitate towards the pursuit of development. And within that confines, it is probably true that there is no universally acceptable definition of planning. However, system of community action over a period of time. A national plan constitutes the decision of national persons and corporations for the achievement of coordinated aims within a fixed period. So the whole idea of national planning, as we have known it in Nigeria, prior to independence and post-independence, revolves in how ideas are put together to pursue transformative and can actually be put in place to attain development. Historically, in February 1946, the first attempt for incorporating a plan was adopted by the Council. It derived from a development in 1940 when the Colonial Development and Welfare Act was passed in Britain with the purpose of promoting social betterment of the colonies. Following the adoption of legislation incorporating the plan, a Colonial Economic Advisory Committee with a membership that included economists such as Union Robbins, Evan Dublin, and Northplant, Hubert Henderson, ex-colonial administrators such as the former governor of Nigeria, Sir Bernard Bodilon, was established. The controversy that greeted the committee over its status, role, and competence to discuss or initiate the discussion of such matters as strategies for agricultural development, industrial development, colonial, public debt, division of taxation between the colonies and the United Kingdom, and the bulk purchasing arrangement made the enactment of a new Colonial Development and Welfare Act imperative. So when Britain took interest in Nigeria and had pursued her colonial plans to certain aspects, they saw the need to bring about a 10-year development plan that would emphasize issues of growth in agriculture, proper administration, issues of competence in respect of industrialization, and even infrastructural development to be pursued under this development plan. And the idea behind it is premised on the fact that there is the need to put in place certain measures of development that would aid the administration of these territories and to also better the lots of the lives of the citizenry, in quotes. So having said that, the plan in itself contains certain aspects that was targeted at societal transformation, like we earlier mentioned. Emphasis was placed on agriculture, industrialization, administration in itself, and they laid the framework for the triumph of other development plans. The new Colonial Development and Welfare Act of 1945 restricted the role of the advisory committee to the steady inflow of development plans from the colonies without imposing solutions on them. As far as Nigeria was concerned, each side detected that some central organization be established for overall coordination, control of finances, and the preparation of major policies. An advisory committee on economic development and social committee was established in the colonial office, but its membership was restricted to officials. Also, a central development board consisting of the development secretary and three chief commissioners for the northern, western, and eastern provinces, the commissioner of the colony, the financial secretary to the government, and the director of public works was established in the secretariat in Lagos. The function of the board was to lay down planning principles and policies, priorities, and funding of development year by year and between one part of the country and another. In the provinces and the colony, the chief commissioner established area development committees made up in each case of the residents and representatives of departments. The area committee were expected to evaluate proposals from the provinces prior to their submission of the Central Development Board. Each province, there were 24 of them, also had a provincial development committee consisting of the residents as chairman, representatives of the departments, and some unofficial members. What this is trying to say is to give the structural arrangement of the caliber of persons or the ideas and the brainwork behind the formation of these development plans as embedded in the boards that were formed and with the persons that man these various positions and that were charged with the duties to implement the policies that are inherent in the development plan, like we earlier mentioned, that emphasis was placed on agriculture, industrialization, infrastructure, and all. So this member of persons formed a board, an advisory board, that gave adequate information to the colonial office on how to pursue development within the confines of the Nigerian state and in similar states where Britain held sway in terms of its colonial policies. The role of this committee was to prepare local schemes to be sent to the Area Development Committee. The arrangement, according to Okibu, would have been to no avail if there had been no organization at the apex to make the necessary decisions. The answer was the Governor Council in Lagos, who took the necessary decision on the spot, and the Secretary of State for the colonies in the colonial office, who had the power to approve or reject proposals. And since the bulk of the finance was to come directly from or was channeled through the colonial office, the approval or sanction of the Secretary of the State became, in the final analysis, the ultimate authority and represented British government policy. Simultaneously, decisions that were to apply to a particular colony had to be given local legal backing. In Nigeria, they were therefore referred to the Legislative Council, in which at that time British official members predominated over Nigerian members who were either elected as in the colony or appointed as in the protectorate. The 10-year plan of development and welfare in Nigeria, 1946-1956, had therefore to be approved by the Legislative Council in order to have the necessary legal validity and legitimacy. The philosophy underlying the plan was fully articulated in a document published in 1945 entitled Preliminary Statement on Development in Nigeria. The need for planning was defined by the uneven progress of the country up to that time, a situation made worse by the retrenchment policies of the 1930s following the worldwide recession. It had become apparent, therefore, that coordinated plans to be formulated and executed to improve the standard of health, education, transport, and other similar services. The plan drew deeply on the philosophical attitude of the time, in particular, socialist doctrines that sprang from the triumph of the Labour Party in Britain after 2 decades in the shadows. The preoccupation with welfare and social development in Britain was carried forward to the colonies and translated into concrete form in the plan. Under the plan, a total planned expenditure of about 110 million for a period of 10 years was envisaged, with 46 million of the amounts to be met with funds provided under the Colonial Development and Welfare Act. Still within the structural arrangement and the implementation body that was built under the colonial administration and colonial government to see to the issues of welfare of the citizenry, issues of the growth in agriculture, the issues of industrial transformation and its value chain and its linkages between agriculture and industrialization, and how that has the potentials of transforming the society to an advanced one was pursued by these various strategies under this development plan. The beauty of it revolves in the fact that there was actually a plan put in place to aid the development of the Nigerian state, as it were, under the colonial government. So these various persons and various positions and structures were meant to transform the lots of the citizenry and to pursue development post-independence. The plan, however, did not run in its full term because by 1950, the inappropriateness of charting development over a period as long as 10 years in a country experiencing rapid structural changes had become evident. In other words, the development plan had its challenges that necessitated its dissection into 2 years arrangement or 5 years term each. So instead of pursuing a 10 years lump sum plan, there was the need for it to be dissected into 2 halves. The estimated cost of project over a 10-year period would be at best an educated guesswork. This was readily appreciated in the formulation of the plan that the cost figures were only tentative and would be subject to further revision in the light of new information, knowledge, and prospect of financing. Also, the data required for the effective planning were grossly deficient. Therefore, a decision was taken to break the plan into 2 5-year periods between 1946 1951 and 1951 to 1956. The plan had been criticized for many reasons. For example, the authors of the National Plan 1962-1968 wrote that the program of the 10-year plan of development and welfare for Nigeria were not plans in the true sense of the word. More accurately, they constituted a series of projects which had not been coordinated and related to any overall economic target. The criticism contained a large element of truth. It was valid in the sense that there were no overall economic targets in terms of macroeconomic variables readily quantifiable against which the performance of the plan could be measured. The plan also was comprehensive as it was more of a list of projects, the selection and preparation of which did not take into account the participation of the people being planned for. It completely neglected major branches of activity, for example, industry, and concentrated on social services, agriculture, and communications. One major error which was frequently committed, the author of the National Development Plan 1960 continued, was that entirely new unrelated projects were readily substituted for original programs without proper analysis and coordination with other projects. What this is saying is that first, the 10-year plan was seen by those that were charged to implement these policies to be too cumbersome, and that it was more of a guesswork than what reflects the realities on ground. There was the need to split it into 2 halves. So instead of being from 1946 to 1956, it became from 1946 to 1951, and from 1951 to 1956. However, it was criticized on many fronts. And the first of it is that it did not carry along the people that it was tailored to serve their interests. In other words, it was more of an exogenous arrangement that did not factor in the indigenous people or the nature and character of the societies where it was to be implemented. Secondly, it was not comprehensive enough, as it was more of a draft than what it should have been in actual terms. Also, they did not consider the financial implications of this plan and rather made a very hasty arrangement that did not suit the nature and character of the society. Then emphasis was more on social services, more than agriculture and even industrialization. And these are the bedrock for development in every society. So this first National Development Plan, as conceived in the colonial arrangement, did not augur well with the Nigerian people, or did not meet the yearnings and aspirations of the people during the colonial periods, owing to the fact that it neglected certain aspects that ordinarily would have been the central point of the idea, which is the people in themselves. So that development plan has its challenges and necessitated other plans post-independence. However, the high point of it is premised on the fact that there was a plan and it gave birth to other plans that kept on moving and pursued certain development ideas that sought to transform the society to a certain considerable extent. So, in other words, the first National Development Plan of 1946 to 1956 laid the foundation for other development plans. The justification given was flexibility. Actually, 10 years was too long a span given the state of statistical information to plan for a country like Nigeria. Other plans that emanated from these plans include Development Plan of 1955 to 1960. The plan, even though revised 1951-1956 plan was not due to come to an end until March 1st, 1956, it came to a premature end in 1955 as a result of the introduction of a federal system of government in the country in 1954. Since the new constitutional arrangement made each of the regions autonomous, each of the then regional governments and the federal government launched its own 5-year development plan for the period of 1955-1960. After a series of reviews, the estimated total cost of the program was about 328 million naira. One consequence of setting up such powerful autonomous regions was the existence of consideration overlapping in the plans of the various regions and the need to coordinate them at the national level. The National Economic Council, which was established in 1955, was the first major attempt to create a national institutional framework for planning, and this body was to provide a forum to discuss development policies and common economic problems. The National Economic Council, which was chaired initially by the Governor General and later by the Prime Minister, while the regional premiers and some federal and regional ministers were members, was intended to achieve the coordination that the decentralization of planning had made necessary. It was stipulated that the Council will be a consultative body in which the government of the Federation and the regions may meet to discuss the many economic problems common to each, notwithstanding their separate constitutional functions and of consequences reaching beyond their respective constitutional sphere. The Council will provide a permanent basis for such consultations without, however, encroaching upon the authority entrusted by the Constitution to the respective governments. What this is simply saying is that after the first National Development Plan, there was the need for other development plans. But this time around, we are spread across the various regions owing to the fact that Nigeria adopted a federal system that necessitated the setting up of various regions and various development plans within those regions, however, were directed by the central government. So there was the need for each of these various regions to pursue various development plans. So the high point of the second development plan was the fact that it was regionally based. Each region had the power and the resources to pursue its own development plan, and which they followed religiously to a certain aspect. It is designed to give the maximum encouragement to the development of the national economic policy and to close operations towards that end between governments and the federation. One defect of the National Economic Council was that its deliberations were infrequent, meeting only 17 times in the 10 years of its existence, an average of about 1.5% meetings a year, and there were years too in which it did not meet. The mode of discourse at the next meeting was said to be one of generalized debates, examinations of policies. Conscious of its relative weaknesses, the National Economic Council established the Joint Planning Committee in 1958 as its intellectual and technical arm, which was charged with the advisory task of formulating planning objectives and of coordinating the planning proposal of the federal and regional governments. This committee, chaired by the economic advisor to the Prime Minister, had officials, permanent secretaries of planning ministries of the government of the Federation as members. Its specific duties, among others, were: one, to examine and report upon any matters remitted to it by the National Economic Council or individual governments. To advise the National Economic Council in particular was one of its major functions. Preparing a statement of fundamental objectives for the guidance of the planning committee of the several governments in the Federation of their development plans for each succeeding period, examining the plans formulated by the government and advising what modifications should be made to them in the light of the fundamental objectives agreed for this period, in order that the plans together may form a coherent whole to direct its secretariat the collection, coordination, and dissemination of information, although the JPC was supposed to be a committee of experts drawn from the federal and regional government. Most of those who took part in its deliberations were not economists, but generalist administrators. Other witnesses of the committee, according to Oyobari, 1975, include the fact that its members were not only impermanent, its meetings were generally attended only by junior regional and federal officials. The high rate of mobility of civil servants between ministries and between ranks caused a rapid turnover in the committee's membership. Although the officials were expected to attend and to discuss the issues before them passionately and the interest of the country as a whole, the divergent views of the members of the JPC, according to Okibo, often reflected the positions taken by the government, whose delegates they were. You know, the point here made is premised on the fact that the second national development plan was regionally based, even though it had regulatory structures from the central government. The emphasis were more on using the civil service and using the operations and the steps that are embedded in the structures that inherited from the first national plan to project development. However, it had these shortcomings, and it's premised on the fact that there was no synergy and there was no conformity between what was obtainable in each of the regions, side by side, the pursuit from the federal government in itself. So in other words, every region had some measure of autonomy that was not a reflection of what was happening in other regions and was also at variance with the center. So those together formed a lot of the weaknesses that we experienced in the Second National Development Plan. Also, the issues of funding was another aspect of it that was not adequately considered. The budgetary provisions for them was not entirely met, and it sought to provide a lot of challenges in the pursuit of the high points that were to be achieved under the plan. In fact, the rivalry between the regions became a regular feature of the meetings of the JPC, and this rivalry was often transferred to the meetings of the National Economic Council. The fact that the committee was subservient to the National Economic Council and the need to reflect its own deliberations, the political bargaining of the council made the JPC succumb to political pressure. So, with all these challenges, the Second National Development Plan did not entirely meet the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerian people. However, it laid the structure and pursued certain aspects and attained certain objectives too that sought to the development of the various regions and to a large extent promoted the agenda of development within the Nigerian states. So after that plan, there was also the 1962-1968 plan. At this 10th meeting in 1959, the National Economic Council decided that a national development plan be prepared for the country. This decision gave birth to the 1962-1968 plan. Under the plan, a total investment expenditure of about 2,130 million was proposed. Out of this, the public sector investment was expected to be 1,352,003 million, while the remaining investment expenditure of 780 million was expected to be undertaken by the private sector. The statement of national objectives expressed in the 1962-1968 plan appeared clear and articulate. These objectives were basically the achievement and maintenance of the highest possible rate of increase in the standard of living and the creation of the necessary conditions for this, including public support and awareness that will be required. In concrete terms, these objectives were translated to cover a growth rate of the gross domestic product and 4% per annum growth, two savings ratio to be raised to 15% of the gross domestic product, annual investment of 15% of gross domestic product, acceptance by all governments that the highest priority should go to agriculture industry, training of high-level and intermediate manpower. However, it was guesswork, as the planners did not have at their disposal the relevant information on the main parameters such as consistent national income series, data on population growth, and its characteristics, productivity, cost, and financial flows. For example, the rate of growth of 4% per annum was arrived at by using 1950-1957 data for national income to calculate the income for this base year is 1962, and this was extrapolated to 1968. In the absence of such detailed information, the cost of decision could become prohibitive, and the possibilities of inconsistent decision became greater and greater. What this point is trying to say is that the next National Development Plan that was put in place from 1962 to 68 had at its high point the issues of improvement in gross domestic product, improvement in per capita income, improvement in even manpower development, and so many other high points that ordinarily would have been the yardstick for the transformation of the society. However, had its own challenges as well, and which was tailored in the fact that it did not put into consideration the actual growth rate, actual population growth rate. Rather, it made use of the data that were available in the previous plans, which necessarily did not suit or conform to the standard of the current nature of the plan that was needed. It did not fit into the arrangement of that period of time. So it had its challenges, and those challenges, to a large extent, affected its implementation. So, in fact, the 1962-1968 plan was described as the first national plan. The plan was so described because it was the first post-independence plan, the previous ones having been formulated and executed during the colonial era with little participation, especially during the 10 years plan of development and welfare by Nigerian nationals. It was even clear that the 1962-1968 plan rectified the defects in the previous plans. It has therefore become necessary to see how far this claim is true and to what extent the 1962-1968 plan established a procession of truly national plan. Beyond that, there was the 1970-1974 plan. The plan before the expiration of the 1962-1968 plan and just about the time that the preparation of the next plan was to commence, the country experienced a national crisis of proportion, which seriously affected the operation of the planning institution. The National Economic Council and Joint Planning Committee, JPC, ceased to function because of the crisis. They were both replaced by National Economic Planning Advisory Group in 1966. One of the functions of this body was to review the progress of the economy since independence. The advisory group was unable to function effectively in an environment that required a rigorous and constant interventionist policy by the government in the economic affairs of the nation. The second National Development Plan in 1974 was formulated and implemented under a military regime, and it was launched shortly after the end of the Civil War, with the aim of reconstructing the war-battered economy and social development in the country. The preparation of the second National Development Plan would have been finalized much earlier, but because of the Civil War, the implantation of the first National Development Plan was extended to 1970. The experience and the lessons of war no doubt influenced the national philosophy, which served as the principal focus of the plan. This philosophy was spelled out in the objectives which were to establish Nigeria as a unitary, strong, and self-reliant nation, a great and dynamic economy, a just and egalitarian society. What this is saying is that after the 1962-1968 plan, there was the 1970-1974 plan. But the 1962-1968 plan was interrupted by the Civil War. So it was extended beyond its duration to incorporate a certain aspect of the devastation that took place during the Civil War. So with the coming into place of the second development plan, the emphasis was on rebuilding the nation in itself and to put in a social structure that would see to the welfare of the Nigerian people and that would reduce the challenges or the devastation of the war-torn economy. So the plan sought to establish a unitary system of government, a great and dynamic economy, a just and an egalitarian society, and all these were premised on the need to incorporate and bring together, integrate the system under a unified government, as certain aspects of region were more destroyed during the war situation, and there was the need for the government to pursue a holistic plan that would bring together all and sundry. So one of the high points is a land of bright and full opportunities for all citizens were to be pursued under the plan, a free and democratic society. This was the first attempt to express the social philosophy underlying the country's planning effort. The plan was much bigger in size. The total capital expenditure was about 4.9 billion naira than its predecessor. According to Ayo, 1988, the second plan was more diversified in its project composition than the earlier plans, and it was in fact the first truly national and fully integrated plan which viewed the economy as an organic unit, the 12 states being fully integrated in the plan. However, Okigo, 1989, described the objective of the 1970-1974 plan as general, or what would be regarded as dynamic. There was no way to measure or assess whether the claim of a particular policy was valid with respect to making Nigeria great and dynamic. The inclusion of the objective of a free and democratic society he constituted took the planners outside the realm of economics. The splitting of the country into 12 states in 1967 brought another dimension to the problem of the planning. The machinery which had been designed to formulate and coordinate national planning when there were 5 governments became inadequate to withstand the demands of 13 governments premised on the creation of new states, most of which lacked the relevant institutional machinery and manpower resources for economic planning. With the exception of perhaps the Western and Midwestern states, all other states were still relatively new for planning purposes during the 1970-1974 plan period, and this included the East Central State, which had just emerged from being the main theater of the Civil War. What emerged, therefore, was a clear recognition that the federal government must take the lead and coordinate the national efforts in formulating the plan. So what this is trying to say is that this second national development plan was more focused, more deliberate, and more people-oriented. And the idea was to take care of the economy of the country after the devastation of the war and to promote the social and welfare packages of all and sundry as a way to carry every segment of the country along. However, one of its challenges was now the creation of states. Initially, it was premised on regions, the Western, the Eastern, and the Northern region, and then the federal government on its own. And then the Midwestern region was eventually created. But this time around, it was split into 12 states. And from the 12 states and the central government, the whole idea of having a synergy in the plan became one of the challenges the second national development plan had. However, within its scope and the pursuit of its plans, it was more deliberate and had more resources at its disposal beyond the earliest development plans. So, to a large extent, it pursued its agendas vigorously and recorded tremendous successes along the line. The greater role was exercised through the Federal Ministry of Economic Development and Economic Planning Unit located in that ministry. The Economic Planning Unit, in essence, became the centralized agency for coordinating federal and state projects through mutual consultations. As to the institutional machinery for planning after the Civil War, the pre-war practice and methods became inadequate. Therefore, a professional planning body, the Central Planning Office, was created in 1972 under the umbrella of the Federal Ministry of Economic Planning and Construction. The Central Planning Office replaced the Economic Planning Unit to ensure that all the sectors of the economy were given adequate consideration in the formulation of the plan. The National Economic Advisory Council was set up in 1972. This was in response to the criticism that the private sector had been planned for, but not taken into confidence. This council was presided over by the Federal Commissioner for Economic Development and Reconstruction, and its membership cut across the various sectors of the economy, comprising the representatives of the various organizations in the private sector of the economy, such as the trade unions, the Nigerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, university teachers, some acknowledged individual professionals and officials of the Central Bank and Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research. It was to advise the government on economic matters. It arguably was set up to say to the inputs of this organized private sector representative in the council adequately to take care of sectors that are of interest in development plans. In fact, the Doji Public Service Review Commission cynically observed in 1974 that the performance of the national economic agenda has so far fallen below expectations. Its performance has been more or less limited to consideration of papers prepared by the Central Planning Office. The whole idea captured or encapsulated in this development plan is premised on the fact that there is the need for the various units, the various component units, to pursue development plans that would be people-oriented, having structures that would see to the implementation of these various ideas and agendas that were conceived immediately after the Civil War. So there was the need to have a focus, a direction, and a sense of belonging by all and sundry as a way to see to the indivisibility of Nigeria as a single entity. Remember what caused the Civil War was basically a secessionist agenda. So after the war, with the establishment of this national plan and these various structures to see to the implementation of the principles, policies, and objectives of the plan, there was the need to focus on rebuilding Nigeria and holding it as a single entity in the interest of all and sundry. So this was definitely not sufficient. The council was expected to identify problems independently, commission its own studies, and make positive recommendations to the government on the integration of the private sector in the planning process. Another body, the Joint Planning Board, which drew its membership from the federal and state ministries, the Central Bank of Nigeria, and the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research, was set up to harmonize the economic policies and development activities of the federal and state government and to examine in details all aspects of the planning and make recommendations to the government. In the military era, the draft went from the Joint Planning Board to the higher decision-making bodies, such as the Conference of Ministers and Commissioners for Economic Planning, Federal Executive Council, National Council of Ministers, and the National Council or the Armed Forces Ruling Council for approval. This body was the highest authority making policy, projects, and programs during a military regime, and it was composed of the head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces as chairman, the chief of staff, supreme headquarters, or chief of general staff, the secretary to the federal military government, heads of Nigerian Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the police, and a few other top-ranking military officers were all part of the people or part of the structure that sought the implementation of the Second National Development Plan. In order for us not to dwell so much on the structural arrangement of this plan, it will be best for us to look at the high points that have made these plans stand out. The first plan was the 1946-1956 plan. That plan seen under the colonial arrangement. Even the 1952-1958 plan was also within the ambit of the colonial system. But the 1962-1968 plan was considered the first national plan owing to the fact that it was done post-independence. Then the second plan of 1970-1974 plan also pursued certain aspects, especially as it concerns rebuilding Nigeria and reconstructing Nigeria after the Civil War, and had more detailed focus and targets, and its objectives were clearer than the earliest development plans. So if one is asked to differentiate what these various plans are, you would look particularly issues of the implementation of plans to the point of implementation, to the emphasis on issues of agriculture, to social welfare, and industrialization. So all these are built into these various development plans. The structural arrangement also are more coherent and more potent under the second development plan than it was in the first development plan. So having said that, there were a lot of issues ranging from the actual implementation procedures, the extent of the successes recorded, both from the era of when it was regions to the era of state creation within the confines of the Nigerian state. So in all of these, certain aspects of the extent of the implementation, the percentages of implementation, and the allocations to education, to agriculture, the industrialization differs from each of the various development plans. Finally, defense and security represented as much as 10% of the overall plan and 17% of the federal government program. This new development reflected the increasing emphasis of the federal government on security and defense problems as a result of the Civil War. So various aspects ranging from defense to education to health to infrastructure and to even social welfare and to agriculture and industrialization had their various allocations under these various development plans. So this was the first time the federal government had entered into direct production in agriculture. Either though it was content to leave that to the states, that is the region, state governments which established farms and plantations. The position of the federal government that by its entry into this field, the food problem will be nearer to its solution reflects the prevailing philosophy and a lack of appreciation by all governments of the economics of state government intervention in direct production. This miscalculation of 1970s has continued to influence successive governments, which in the face of unsatisfactory results have multiplied their involvement instead of pulling out of direct production. So there was also the 1975-1980 plan. And then this plan also had, first, as its high point, is an advancement of the 1970-1974 plan. The dimension of the plan, it has been observed from the second development plan as formulated, were not operational. The view, as also expressed in a different way concerning the third national development plan, 1975-1980, the statement of the objective merely provided a broad view of the ultimate aspiration of the society. The 5 cardinal objectives of the second national plan were modified and expanded into 7 short objectives for the third national plan. One of the points here to be noted is that while the 1970-74 plan was considered successful to an extent, the 1975-1980 plan, which is the third national development plan in the Nigerian state, had very deliberate points that it pursued, and it ranged from increase in per capita income, more even distribution of income, reduction in the level of unemployment, increase in supply of high-level manpower, diversification of the economy, balanced development, and other aspects as well were part of the third national development plan. It had its challenges too, but by 1975, the country's oil production was at a record level of 2.3 million barrels per day, while the price stood at $14.69 per barrel, having risen from $3.55 per barrel in 1973. Nigeria's oil production was projected to reach 3.0 million barrels per day by the end of the plan period. This was, however, not realized due to the prevailing world economic depression, which resulted in production and price decline to the extent that the estimated value of oil exports in the first year of the plan in 1970 fell by about $1 billion. So the high points here made is premised on the fact that the third national development plan had a lot of emphasis on economic progress and prosperity and was deliberate in its pursuit, but made this budget around the petrodollar, which to an extent was faced with a global crisis and sought to retard the extent of the implementation of this plan. However, it was considered as one of the best plans that was put in place in the pursuit of development within the Nigerian state. So when one is asked to look at what were the high points or what are the high points of this development plan, one should focus more on its economic benefits than other considerations. So There was also the 1981 to 1985 development plan. The 1981-1985 plan objective towards the end of the military administration in 1979. The federal military government issued guidelines for the fourth National Development Plan. The 5-year plan was launched until January 1, 1981. The reason for the delay was to enable the new civilian administration, which was installed on October 1st, 1979, to participate in the formulation of policies and programs of a development plan that it was to implement. The 1981-1985 plan will provide for an investment of 82 billion naira, was therefore launched by a democratically elected government under a new constitution based on a presidential system of government. The plan was intended to further the process of establishing a solid base for the long-term economic and social development plan. So, in as much as the earliest plan were more of military handiwork to pursue development, this particular plan was put in place by a civilian government and had a more robust budget to put in place its plans for economic growth and successes. High priority was consequently accorded agriculture, particularly food production, manufacturing, education, manpower development, and infrastructural facilities. Social services like housing, health, and water supply were also emphasized with a view to improving the quality of life in both urban and rural areas. So the specific objectives set for the plan were increase in average income of average citizens, more even distribution of income among individuals and socio-economic groups, reduction in the level of unemployment and underemployment, increase in the supply of skilled manpower, reduction of dependence of the economy on a narrow range of activities, balanced development, that is achievement of a balance in the development plan. So all these were encapsulated in the fourth National Development Plan. And other points that also were considered revolved around increased participation by citizens in ownership and management of production enterprises, which is built under the nationalization and digitalization policy that were pursued in the 80s. Greater self-reliance, that is increased dependence on local resources in seeking to achieve the various objectives of societies. This also implied greater effort to achieve the optimum utilization of Nigeria's human and material resources. So all these were encapsulated in the various development plans. And you must take note of the differentials in these plans. In as much as they were all targeted at attaining development, they have certain aspects that stand them out in the course of their developmental quests. So having said that, the issues of planning generally had its problems within the Nigerian state. And in summary of it all, it revolves around the issues of borrowing, issues of being built around petrodollar that sometimes plummets when one looks at the global economic crisis and influences from time to time. So all this affected the planning processes in Nigeria. Planning in the developing economy goes further to attempt to fulfill the objective of transforming the economy from a low level of production to a higher level of self-sustained growth. This is done by planning for a more effective use of existing resources, developing resources for future use, and dismantling institutional and other constraints which hampers the growth of the resource base of the economy is also a major challenge when one looks at the issues of development. So within the confines of discussion of the various development plans, first from the 1956 plan, and from the 1960 to 1968 plan, and 1970 to 1974 plan, 1975 to 1980, and 1981-1985 plan, the whole idea is premised on how to attain development within the confines of the Nigerian state. In spite of the apparent faultless process and machinery for development planning in the country, success has been mixed due to problems which the planning agencies have to contend with. These problems range from shortage of executive capacity, conflicts in areas of planning, planning indiscipline, and the advisory role of the planning machinery, shortage of executive capacity, asserts that experts from the former National Planning Office, which had a cadre of specially trained planning officers, very few ministries and agencies at both the federal and state levels had such an institution to undertake planning functions on a permanent basis. Planning duties, therefore, had to be undertaken by administrative officers who were given ad hoc training prior to the commencement of plan preparation. What usually emerged from this arrangement was the production of planners who were amateurs in planning activities. So all this constitutes the challenges that the various planning arrangements faced within the confines of the Nigerian state. Prospect for planning in Nigeria. In spite of all the problems highlighted in the course of this study, there are still prospects for using the planning process to achieve Nigeria's development objectives. As indicated earlier, except perhaps the National Planning Commission, which can be said to have some trained planning officers, very few ministries and agencies at both the federal and state levels have officers with relevant training to undertake planning functions on a permanent basis. Planning duties have therefore been undertaken by administrative officers who are given ad hoc training prior to the commencement of plan preparation. Summary: Nigeria's planning experience dates back to 1945 when the British Colonial Office requested the colonies to prepare development plans which would assist in disbursing the colonial development and welfare funds. In response to this request, the administration in Nigeria prepared a 10-year plan of development and welfare covering the period 1946 to 1956, but this plan was greeted with criticism. We will stop here at this point, but the point here made is that Nigeria has experienced a lot of deliberate processes to attain development, and they are all embedded in the various national development plans that were pursued pre-independence and post-independence, and the various institutions that were set up or put in place to implement these development plans. So the emphasis was more economical than other considerations. So emphasis was built around agriculture and its value chain in propelling industrialization and the social aspects of development that are put in place under these various development plans. So the whole idea is premised on how to pursue development through deliberate plan and through deliberate national efforts. So the whole idea of this lecture is tailored towards the efforts that have been put in place to transform the society from an underdeveloped standard to a more advanced one, and the efforts that have been put in place by various governments to present-day Nigeria. Having said that, we shall be discussing other aspects in subsequent classes, and questions and answer sessions would be made adequate provisions for, so that we can go into details on how to understand the differentials that are inherent in these various development plans. So we'll be stopping here at this moment to give room for other lectures, as we are told that every lecture should last for just an hour. So see you in the next class, and we hope to have a robust revision class as we make progress.